Friday the 13th is a date of superstition. It's believed by many to be a date that is unlucky, and at times, often tragic. So much so that it has its own psychological term, frigotriscae decaphobia. Fear for Friday the 13th goes back millennia, quite possibly as far back as Christ's crucifixion. National Geographic suggests that the origins of the unlucky Friday the 13th began with the betrayal of Jesus Christ. The disciple Judas was considered to be the 13th guest at the Last Supper, in which Mother Mary was in attendance. The Last Supper, in biblical lore, took place on a Thursday, and was on that day that Judas betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. And then, on the following day, known to many in Christendom as Good Friday, Christ was crucified. And so it is the consumption of those two events that began the unlucky and unholy fear of Friday the 13th. Continuing with its links to Christianity, some believe the fear of the date truly began with the murder of thousands of Knights Templar at the hands of France's King Philip IV. King Philip accused the Knights Templar of heresy and blasphemy, and under torture many Templars confessed to sins that they did not commit, which ultimately led to their executions. King Philip did this because he was rumored to be deeply in debt financially to the religious order. Other scholars link the superstition to a similar story told within Norse mythology. In this tale, the Norse god Odin held a banquet for 12 other Norse gods. Loki, who was not invited, would have been the 13th guest. Loki, a trickster god, orchestrated a mischievous act that ultimately led to the death of Balder. Balder has numerous similarities to Jesus Christ himself. Balder was the god of light and the god of purity, and he was also the son of Odin. His death brought about great mourning amongst the gods, and from then on, Friday the 13th lurked on the periphery of society until it was further brought into the cultural zeitgeist by the film franchise of the same name. In a legacy spanning 12 films, spree killer Jason Voorhees is a ghoulish, bloody addition to the already gruesome fear of the holiday. And it was on this day in July 1990, in the small town of Panhandle, Texas, that 19-year-old Kenneth Milner began a killing spree that would span the course of the night and leave one dead and two more on death's door. In recent years, news media has begun to reevaluate and deconstruct the Satanic Panic, a bout of mass hysteria that afflicted the United States for over a decade. But what if it wasn't just hysteria? What if some of it was true? Ritual Rewind brings you into the darkest corners of the 1980s, uncovering the crimes, conspiracies, and occult fears that shaped a generation. Tonight, we rewind it back to 1990 and dive into the story of Kenneth Glenn Milner and his murder spree in Panhandle, Texas on the fateful night of Friday the 13th. It's a tale of superstition, satanic worship, and a personal death wish to join the devil in hell. It's the case of the devil and Friday the 13th. I'm your host, Drew, and you're listening to The Ritual Rewind.
On Friday, July 13th, 1990, a teenager named Kenneth Glenn Milner went on a violent spree in the city of Panhandle. He shot Panhandle High School principal Ken Williams 3 times, then slashed the throat and arms of Jimmy Britton with a straight razor.
Finally, the spree ended with Milner killing 17-year-old Frankie Garcia in a satanic ritual.
Mother, Daddy, I'm sorry that I'd end up like this. It's not your fault. There's nothing to use. It's tear. Psychological and tear. I always want to be better at something than somebody else. And this is my chance. There's just nothing here for me that I want.
Panhandle, Texas was a quiet, close-knit community, and nothing would prepare them for what that night would entail, and it would haunt them for decades to come. Kenneth Glenn Milner was born in 1971, and he grew up in the Panhandle. His parents ran a local bar named Shirley. Milner was by all accounts considered a good kid. He was handsome, he did well in school, and he had plenty of girls fawning all over him. It wasn't until Milner entered high school that he began to show signs of far darker impulses. He started drinking heavily, and when he was drunk, he would get angry with others as well as himself. And this usually resulted in blood, and most often with him cutting himself with a knife. Milner had also had multiple run-ins with police, and in 1988, after a failed romantic relationship, Milner climbed to the top of the town's water tower and threatened to jump off. Police discovered him there and successfully persuaded him to come down. They then urged him to seek psychological treatment, but it was unsuccessful. A short time later, Milner again attempted to end his life, this time by driving off the cliffside of a nearby canyon. Obviously, for this story to continue, Milner survived with minimal injuries. Again, he was admitted to Northwest Texas, a psychiatric hospital, for treatment, and ultimately, it failed to turn Milner away from his darker obsessions. According to his close friends and family, Milner had had a long fascination with horror movies and serial killers. He spent so many hours watching these violent films that friends claimed he knew them by heart. Milner admired killers like Ted Bundy, Charles Manson, and Jack the Ripper. Friends would say that Milner had a twisted sense of humor and loved to scare the hell out of people. He was obsessed with the other side and wanted to know what would happen after you died. He began to read ritualistic texts such as the Satanic Bible and adamantly rejected God. That was a hard take in an extremely Christian community. Not only did Milner claim to reject God, but he also claimed to actively worship the devil. But it was when he was given the book, the Necronomicon, that really pushed Milner to the edge. The Necronomicon, also known as the Book of the Dead, is a grimoire that appeared in stories written by horror and sci-fi author H.P. Lovecraft. In its pages, the Necronomicon contained instructions on how to summon demons and produce astral projections. Milner spent many nights devoted to studying the tome. As he dived deeper into the occult, Milner ruminated over his grievances and began to construct a list of people that he believed had wronged him in some way or another. In the days leading up to his murder spree, Milner recorded his manifesto on a VHS tape, explaining his motives. Because in the end, Milner planned to kill himself after his plan was complete. He would recite an incantation to the devil in hopes that it would guarantee him a slot in a higher echelon of hell. The videotaped confessions began with Milner addressing the camera. He states,
"My name is Kenneth Glenn Milner. I'm 19, and this is my confession. I've got a lot of talent, a great family, and many girlfriends who are beautiful. But it's not enough. I want more. I guess the one thing I do have that is kind of a downside is the desire to kill."
Milner felt it was his time to move on, and that he planned to take a few people with him. As he continued, he said,
"It will be very brutal and very sadistic and bloody, but it will get people's attention. You all probably think that I'm a deranged lunatic, but I am not. I want people to know my name, the name I go by, which is Damien."
Damien is a reference to the child in the 1976 horror film, The Omen. The child also happened to be the Antichrist, the son of Satan. Milner chose the name Damien because it was synonymous with death, destruction, and doom, and also because he truly desired to be the son of Satan. The first person on Milner's list was 17-year-old Frankie Garcia. Garcia was considered a good kid and a good student, much like Milner had been. But Garcia was an overeager kid who struggled to make friends, despite trying his hardest to do so. Milner had no reason to select Garcia. He had no grievance with him. The only reason he chose Garcia was because Milner believed he needed a virgin sacrifice to secure his position at Satan's side. Milner utilized Garcia's need for friends to lure him out to the derelict barn behind an abandoned house, a house that had become known to the local kids as the haunted house, and it was a rumored location for satanic rituals. Prior to Garcia's trek out to the barn, he expected something was up. In a conversation a few hours before his fateful demise, Garcia commented to a friend, "Milner doesn't like me. He just wants to pull a prank on me and scare the hell out of me." If Garcia had only heeded his gut instinct, he may still have been alive today, but he didn't. And as Milner waited Garcia's arrival, he drew a pentagram into the dirt and placed lit candles in a circle around it. It can't be known what Garcia was thinking when he arrived at the barn, but we do know that he begged for his life. Garcia had just wanted to be a friend to Milner. He trusted him, and his trust was betrayed. Milner forced Garcia to his knees in the center of the pentagram and shoved the barrel of his revolver into Garcia's mouth, and then he pulled the trigger. Garcia's body wouldn't be discovered for some time later. Milner left the haunted house on a mission. He had a list of targets, and he intended to complete it before the night's end. On the way to his next victim's house, Milner passed by 2 high school friends. They asked what he was doing, and Milner responded,
I just got done taking care of some business, and I've got to take care of some more.
The 2 friends could tell something was different about Milner, so much so that they noticed a change in his voice, like he wasn't the same person. Something told them to back off, to leave him be. And unlike some others on this horrible night, they listened, and they left Milner alone. Milner made his way to Jimmy Britton's home. Britton was 41 and the stepfather of Milner's ex-girlfriend, Jenny English. It was his breakup with Jenny that pushed Milner to first attempt suicide, and it could be assumed that Milner came for his ex, but found Jimmy Britton instead. Milner called through the door and begged for a phone. He claimed to have wrecked his car and he needed assistance. Britton must have not recognized Milner's voice because he opened the door to help a kid in need. And as they say, no good deed goes unpunished, because Milner immediately lunged at Britton, stabbing him in the chest and abdomen with a straight razor. Britton fought back and was able to wrestle Milner out of the house when Milner paused to vomit. Britton rushed back into the house and locked Milner out. Milner paced around the exterior of the home, his footsteps taunting Britton as he bled out on the floor. However, Milner didn't attempt to enter the home again, but instead he left, assuming Britton would soon be dead. But Milner was wrong. Britton was able to call 911 and alert the police. And when Sheriff Tam Terry was told of Milner's assault, a police manhunt began. They didn't know and wouldn't have expected multiple murders, certainly not in this town. To them, it had to be a one-off, tragic as it may be. But unfortunately, they were wrong. And they wouldn't realize that until Milner's next victim faced his wrath. Milner arrived at his former principal's residence. He hammered on the front door. Ken Williams, Milner's former principal, was 39 at the time. He approached the door and peered through the peephole. What he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. On the other side of the glass, yellow, demonic eyes stared back at him. William couldn't believe what he was seeing. He wasn't a superstitious man, but he did know that it was Friday the 13th, and anything could happen. So he closed his eyes and opened them again. But the eyes were still there, and they were still glowing, staring deep into his soul. Williams blinked again, and this time, he saw Kenneth Milner standing on the other side. Milner continued to pound the door. He demanded to be let in. But Williams knew he shouldn't. And that's when he saw it, the gun in Milner's hand. It was a .357 Magnum revolver. Williams didn't have time to react before 2 shots rang out, blasting through the door. One hit Williams in his gut, another in his upper leg. The door was metal, and small bits of shrapnel embedded themselves into his body, and they're still there today. Williams slumped to the floor, bleeding out, his life minutes from expiring. Milner simply turned around and walked away as if nothing had transpired. Williams wouldn't be alive today if it wasn't for his wife, who had heard the commotion and came rushing to his aid. She shoved 2 fingers into her husband's stomach and clamped down on the bleeding artery, and it's what saved his life. With Milner identified as a suspect, and with no leads as to his whereabouts, Sheriff Tam Terry and his police force swarmed Milner's home, but Milner wasn't there. They were let in by Milner's parents and allowed to search his bedroom. When they entered, they were confronted with a room of horrors. Milner's bedroom walls were painted black, and posters of his idols Jason Voorhees and Freddy Krueger papered his walls. Numerous gruesome masks, demonic masks, custom built by Milner himself and inspired by his morbid fantasies, were scattered about. Lifelike human faces disfigured and combobulated by shotgun blasts, knife attacks, and other explosions. Masks with eyeballs hanging out and blood dripping down their faces, their brains exposed. And in the darkened room, Sheriff Terry found a body lying on the floor, with bullet holes in its chest and blood on its shirt. They prodded the body, thinking it might be Milner having offed himself, but what they found was a carefully crafted corpse made of papier-mâché. Police then discovered a note written by Milner, addressed to one of his friends. It was instructions on how to retrieve a package that was hidden beneath a bridge on a rural dirt road outside of town. Sheriff Tam Terry sped off towards the bridge. There, they found a green artillery box stashed under the bridge. Sheriff Terry was worried that it might be primed with explosives, but he was also under the pressure of finding Milner before he harmed someone else. So Sheriff Terry made the decision to open the box. Inside, he found a VHS tape and 3 handwritten notes. The notes were addressed to Milner's friend Craig Shackelford, Milner's parents, and Kenja, Milner's former girlfriend. She also happened to work for a news station, and the VHS tape, with his recorded manifesto, was addressed to her, and the note promised her the story of her life. While at the bridge, Sheriff Terry was again alerted to another attack, and this one on Principal Williams. And if it wasn't before, there was now a full-on manhunt for Milner. Police cars roamed the streets of Panhandle, shining their spotlights down alleyways and into parks. But to their surprise, Milner came to them. His car was discovered parked outside the police station. He placed his gun underneath his chin, but he hesitated to pull the trigger. He couldn't do it, or maybe he wouldn't do it, because he had forgotten the words to his final incantation to the devil. Or maybe he was just a coward. Sheriff Terry coaxed Milner out of the car, and Milner surrendered without incident. Milner didn't need to confess. They already had his VHS tape, but he did so anyway. He pled guilty to avoid the death penalty because the district attorney for the county said this: "I understand that Milner has indicated his desire to die, and I intend to accommodate him." At his sentencing, Milner stood before the judge and said,
If I ever get out, I will finish the job.
Milner was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms with the possibility of parole. He first became eligible for parole in 2015 and has been up for parole multiple times since, and he has been denied each and every time. The parole board's judgment stated that they still believe Milner to be a threat to the public. Milner's next date for the possibility of parole is in 2030.
I want him to stay there for the rest of his life, and if he gets out, I firmly believe he'll kill again.
In researching this episode, we relied on the newspaper reports, as well as the documentary TV show The Friday the 13th Murders, Obsession to Do Evil, on HBO Max, and the book The Devil's Best Trick by Randall Sullivan. Thank you for joining us tonight on the Ritual Rewind. I'm looking to grow this podcast, so if you like it, please rate it and review it. And if you're listening to this on YouTube, give it a like and a comment. And as always, you can interact with us at The Ritual Rewind on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook.